Psychedelics can be like a spear because they can pierce the veil of the mind and reveal what is beyond the mind. Even things as magnificent as God and enlightenment and nirvana. The slogan of this YouTube channel, if you notice, is spreading nirvana one heart at a time. And psychedelics can help us see nirvana. So if you are interested in spreading nirvana one heart at a time, one of the best ways to do that is to be a trip sitter. And that's what this video is about. There is a lot to say about this topic, and you are very welcome to use the timestamps below to see all the topics available and watch the ones you're interested in. But I want to start the video by talking about what I think is the most important aspect of being a good trip sitter. And I'm going to demonstrate why it's so important by giving you a story of probably the worst psychedelic experience I have ever had. A very condensed version of the story. It's basically a story of 3 guys going to pick magic mushrooms in the wild. That's exactly what we did. We drove somewhere, picked the mushrooms, and then we ate them. The plan was for one of the friends to take a small amount of mushrooms, for me and the other person to take a bigger dose. Now, I was reasonably responsible, in this situation, because I took a moderate dose, around 20 mushrooms. It's a big, strong dose, but I had good intentions at heart. My other friend was not very experienced of psychedelics, so he took a small dose, and he was going to drive many hours later, so he didn't want to take too much, and he was going to look after us a little bit. But here comes the Joker card. The other friend, he took way too many mushrooms. He was just chomping them down. I wasn't keeping track. He wasn't keeping track. And he had so many magic mushrooms, and he had no intention at all. He literally lost his mind. He went literally crazy, temporarily. What I mean by literally crazy is he threw a tantrum like a 3-year-old, kicking and screaming and hitting everything in my friend's car. He got in the car and started throwing this wild seizure-like tantrum about nothing. Later on, he spat at my friend and then apologized, and then 10 seconds later spat at my friend again. He was trying to bully my other friend. He was acting very domineering and bullying, but then when another car of hippies came past, they wanted to ask us where the magic mushrooms are growing, this random car of hippies. But when that happened, my friend who took too much psychedelics, he got so paranoid and he ran off into the bushes. Later on, because I was so frustrated at his bullying of my friend, I just let him go and let him fend for himself. But he was so lunatic at that point, he was rolling in the mud. I don't know how that happened, but he was down in the mud on all fours. He later told us that he was eating some berries, which are not very poisonous, but they're definitely not edible berries. He got stuck in some thorn bushes, and what happened in this situation is I was having to look after this person that was freaking out. But it was really unenjoyable to me because I myself was on a strong psychedelic dose, and this guy was bullying a very good friend of mine. So I was kind of angry at this person. Now, that was not a good psychedelic experience. You know, there's something to learn from that. So in that sense, all psychedelic trips have meaning, but I don't want to repeat that again, that's for sure. So if you enjoyed that little story of how things can go totally wrong, what do you think is the biggest mistake that I made? Here it is. I didn't assess my friends' intentions beforehand. And that is your number one job. Before the trip starts, if you want to be the world's best trip sitter, it's not just about showing up and letting them do psychedelic and babysitting them. Before the trip starts, I would say if you want to be a really good trip sitter, it's your responsibility to ask them, what is your intention? And to make very, very sure that they have noble intentions, that they have some sort of a purification or love-focused or goodwill-focused intention. Something benevolent and auspicious. But if they just have no plan at all and they're a bit of a reckless personality even, then I would suggest don't trip sit them. Tell them to go reflect and come up with a good intention before taking the psychedelic. And also, if you want to be a good trip sitter, recommend that they take a responsible dose. So that's the first part of this video. And I really want to overstate this point, if anything, because online you can find all kinds of advice for how to be a trip sitter. And a lot of it is valid. We're going to talk about more ways to be the world's best trip sitter. But that's number one for me. Before the trip starts, before anyone is taking a psychedelic, ask what is their intention. Get a really precise definition of what they want to do, and you make sure that this is something noble and worthwhile. Now, since we're on the topic of things that I did wrong in this previous example, we need to talk about another really big mistake which I made, and that is taking a psychedelic at all. That is to say, a trip sitter should be totally sober. They should not be taking even a medium or small dose of a psychedelic. If you want to, you can take a psychedelic and go walking through the woods with your friend, enjoy nature, but then I would suggest that is not trip sitting anymore. That's just walking through nature with a friend on psychedelics. If someone is asking you to be their trip sitter, then there is a responsibility attached to that you're looking after this person. And in such a situation, I don't think we should be taking any psychedelic at all. And you can look at this previous example of my friend going crazy. This is a good example about why you should be totally sober. In my defense, I wasn't meant to be the trip sitter. That was meant to be my third friend. He was kind of looking after us because he took a smaller dose. But once things started going awry and my friend started bullying the trip sitter, then he wasn't in the mental space to actually handle that. And let's say my crazy friend, he tripped in a bad way and he broke his arm, or he started bleeding from an accident. Because my other friend had taken some psychedelic, we couldn't safely drive. So what would we do if there was an emergency that required us to go to the hospital? We would probably drive, but it would be a bit dodgy because he was on a psychedelic in a stressful situation, which is not a good combination. So that's why I have the cross on my forehead. This is the number one thing that I would suggest you don't do. If you are in a role of trip sitting and looking after someone or a group of people, it could be tempting if someone says, hey man, why don't you do a little bit? It'll make your experience a bit more interesting and you can still look after us if you just take a little bit. I would suggest don't do that, because if anything goes wrong, even a moderate dose of psychedelic can affect your thinking. It can make you more rashful or maybe more anxious if something does happen, and it makes you not as effective if you need to drive or do whatever you need to do. So that's why I have this cross painted on my forehead. That's the number one rule that a world's best trip sitter shouldn't do. They should not take a psychedelic. They should be sober, be the go-to person in the room. There is a joy in that, and being the responsible, safe one for a given situation. Now, if we want to be the world's best trip sitter, we need to talk about health and safety. The important thing to mention is we really want to avoid a situation where someone needs medical attention. So that's the number one priority, is to make the environment very, very safe Definitely don't go doing silly things like playing with knives. That would be really silly. Also, don't go swimming. If you're taking psychedelics for spiritual purposes, you are probably not going to be eating a lot. But eating is always a choking hazard, so you can avoid that. Definitely not eating while lying down. Don't go on slippery, wet surfaces. Don't go playing around too much. Dancing can be great, of course, but if they're acting too wild and you see there's a potential for tripping and hitting someone's head, then you as a trip sitter can just tell them to relax a little bit. Don't hurt yourself. So we're trying to avoid getting hurt. But also, since we're being a fantastic trip sitter, you can ask this person before the trip starts if they have any medical conditions that you should know about. For instance, they might be allergic to bees. And if they are, then you can make sure that you have the appropriate medication on hand, whatever that might be, antihistamines or whatever. You can make sure you have that with you, just in case a random bee comes and and stings the poor person. That would be very unlucky, but you can just be super prepared. And it could be good to just have a first-hand kit like this little one on hand, just in case something really unexpected happens. But really, if you're doing psychedelics with a good intention and safely, responsibly, it's very, very unlikely that someone will need medical attention. That's never happened to me or anyone I know. One situation that could be quite realistic is someone that is prone to having panic attacks could be asking you to be a trip sitter for exactly that reason. I don't ask people to be my trip sitter, but I tend to be a very relaxed person on psychedelics. I never have fears or paranoia take me over and fears that I'm dying, for instance. But I've had a friend in his family, heart attacks run in his family. So it's a realistic possibility to him that when he gets older, he could have problems, especially if he gets overweight. But one time, me and him, a long time ago, we were just smoking marijuana like young men tend to do, and he started panicking. He had a panic attack. He said his heart was beating fast and he was worried that he was going to get a heart attack and die. Me and a couple of other friends were pretty relaxed. We kind of just brushed it off like, man, that's all right. You're just being paranoid. It's marijuana. Chill out. And he was totally fine. But you can check with someone if they are prone to having panic attacks, which is exactly why they might be asking you to be a trip sitter. If someone is prone to having panic attacks, then everything I said needs to be taken even more diligently. Because people that panic, they can act in unexpected ways. Maybe they want to rush downstairs to the hospital or something, and if you rush downstairs, you can trip and fall. Make sure that you're in a very safe environment if someone is prone to having panic attacks. But even more importantly, if someone is prone to panicking, take a very low dose. Tell them to take a very low dose and see how it goes. Even people that don't suffer from panic attacks, that are pretty relaxed, psychedelics can bring upon us feelings of an ego death, which can feel very realistic because our sense of self can be dying in a way. Revealing something magnificent and godly and beautiful, sure, nirvana, the price for that is giving ourselves up. But that can be a scary experience if you're not expecting it. And if someone is prone to having panic attacks, I can see that totally triggering a panic attack. This ego death experience that psychedelics can bring up, and psychedelics can just be unexpected in what they do in our minds. So the more cautious someone is, the more panicky or anxious someone is, I would reassure them to have good intentions, reassure them to keep their eyes on God, keep their eyes on love, white light, the Holy Spirit. If they have this beautiful intention in their heart, I have only seen good things happen. Psychedelic experiences with a holy intention, in my experience, always go well. But also, you need to do it responsibly. Just let them take a responsible dose, a low dose, even a micro dose, because we can be patient. Tell them to be patient. We'll take a low dose and then a medium dose, and we'll see how it goes. but it would be irresponsible to take someone that has panic attack issues and give them a 20 milligram dose of 5-MeO DMT. They could really start freaking out and start screaming, so we want to not do that. We want to be the world's best trip sitter, and for that we want to make sure they are medically not having any issues. If they do have issues, we are addressing that, taking responsible actions, maybe giving them a low dose, and then as an absolute last layer of resort, we can have a little first aid kit like this. I myself, for work reasons, I've done a first aid course that can also help. I don't think anyone is expecting you to have, you know, a medical degree or even having done a first aid course if you are a trip sitter for them. They just have basic expectations that you'll look after them. But if you want to be the world's best trip sitter, it could be very useful to have a first aid kit and first aid training. So let's move on to the next point now. Wherever it is that you decide to have this psychedelic experience, or rather where your friend will have the experience, I could give a little suggestion, which is to clean the room up, clean the place up. It's just a little thing, but it can be useful. So just vacuum the floor, put things that are laying around away, put them in the drawers. Maybe you can even clean the windows. And I would suggest that the person who's taking the psychedelic actually helps in cleaning the room. This in itself is also a little bit symbolic. The cleaning that you are doing of the room is also a reflection of the cleaning we want to do in our own minds. So although it's a small thing, if you are doing it indoors, I would highly recommend it's a good thing to do, to clean the room to a satisfactory level. Do not do it in a place that is a big mess. That outwards mess could reflect inwards and make it more likely that someone has a jumbled, unpleasant trip. Whereas if they spend the last 40 minutes cleaning, that spirit of wanting freshness is alive within them. This is an origami swan, and on it I have written a heart-intentioned prayer. I recommend that you recommend the psychedelic user does something similar, to write down their intention in the form of a prayer and fold that piece of paper up into an origami swan and then keep that swan nearby. Doing something like this, any kind of ceremony, has a very strong power in amplifying and solidifying and focusing our intention that we have set earlier. And this is very true for everyone, including your psychedelic user that you are trip sitting for. We need to talk about what is behind that curtain in a second. But first, coming back to what I was saying about the origami swan, you don't have to use that specific technique as a ceremony. You can do anything that your imagination allows. For example, one thing you could do if you have a good relationship with someone is you can actually take some holy water and give them a verbal blessing as you put water on their third eye, or something intuitive like that. Also, it could be good to incorporate into your little auspicious ceremony the lighting of some incense, because then the smell has an associated intention with it, again making things even more powerful. So you could take a lighter and light a candle that smells good. A candle though, think about it, that's not the safest thing. You don't want someone to get infatuated with the flame and have a curtain catch on fire. So just for the sake of being really, really safe, it's better to light some incense. There's like barely any fire risk associated with that. Now, talking about preparation even a little bit more and revealing to you what's behind this curtain. Actually, I'm not going to reveal it. I'm just going to tell you what is behind there. It's some stairs. This is the second floor of my home, and right there is stairs going down. So this space is very nice for many reasons, but it's not the best for a trip sitting hosting experience. It's not the best place for someone to have a psychedelic experience, just for the simple fact that if they need the toilet, they need to go down some stairs, which is not the safest thing. So as the trip sitter, we can make sure that the setting is nice. If you want to play music, then you should ask the person that you're doing it for. It's their decision if they want music or not. I would mostly suggest it's better to do it in silence. But maybe you can have a backup music playlist, just in case they're feeling a bit uncomfortable. Music can help open us to beautiful states of consciousness. I would recommend preparing the music beforehand. Definitely choose some music that is not going to have ads in between. We don't want this beautiful experience being ruined by some silly ads. So make sure you have a playlist that's really divinely inspired, really beautiful for the person if they need it or if they want it. This is a very comfortable cushion, which I shall now sit upon. What we will talk about right now is once you've prepared everything and your friend has actually taken a psychedelic, what do you do now? What do you do for the next 5 minutes, 20 minutes, or a few hours that your friend is having their psychedelic experience? Hopefully a really, really good healing experience. During that time, I would recommend you bring with you a comfortable cushion, and ideally you can sit in a nice meditative posture with a straight spine and simply be with them, but not intervening in their experience unless you have to. So why do I recommend you sit and meditate? On a subtle, small way, I think this can inspire the psychedelic user to also meditate and perhaps have a good posture, or even if they're laying down, it seems like you are a responsible spiritual person who just has good focus and good intention. And because you have that focus and intention, it inspires them to introspect in a more clear way, in an auspicious way. If you were just lazying around on a couch, looking at TikTok videos, then that's not inspiring, and it could motivate them to also get distracted in all kinds of little ways. So ideally, you can sit and meditate with a really good posture, maybe even in double lotus. They'll feel like, wow, this guy is taking things really seriously. I should also introspect in an authentic way. But if, let's say it's many hours long that this person is going to have their experience, maybe they took magic mushrooms, then you might not meditate all the time. Then you could perhaps read something, maybe a spiritual book, or maybe take some earphones and listen to music or listen to a podcast. But I would highly recommend you don't do anything that disturbs them. So don't watch YouTube videos that are blaring noise. Even if it's a small amount of noise, it's going to distract from their experience. As the trip sitter, you are giving. You're doing them a favor. But we recognize that it's about them. So everything we do is sort of in the background. We don't want to disturb what they are going through internally. And as this process is happening and you're just sitting there, it could be extremely difficult for you to know what they are going through. They could just be sitting quietly, but internally they can be having all kinds of magnificent shifts. So I wrote a few things on my hand. Let's get through all of them. But one thing that I think is fundamentally good, is to not stare at the person having the experience. It just feels a little bit awkward if someone is literally looking at you as you're laying down, or whatever they're doing. If they're sitting or laying down, you don't want someone staring at you. So, maybe you could even sit just in the next room. You could still see them out of the corner of your eye, but you're just in the other room, or you have good intuition and wisdom. Just sit in a way that doesn't feel like you're their audience and you're hawking them. You're just in the space that they are, but you're giving them as much silence and space as possible. When it comes to silence as well, I would recommend you always let them break it. What I mean by that is, their experience will last a certain amount of time, maybe a short amount of time, 5 minutes if it's DMT, or maybe hours if it's magic mushrooms. But regardless, always let them have the first word. So let's say it's magic mushrooms and it's been 5 hours and you thought, wow, I thought he would only be having an experience for 3 hours, but now it's 5 hours and he's still just meditating. I would recommend don't ask the person, hey man, how's it going? Don't ask anything. Let them break the silence, because they could be going through something really magical internally, and we don't want to disturb that if we can avoid it. Also, when it comes to a catharsis, if the person that you are watching is maybe crying or having some kind of an emotional moment, I would recommend don't intervene, don't talk to them, unless your wisdom is telling you that you should. So before the experience starts, before they take the psychedelic, you can tell them that you're not going to intervene unless you have to. So if they're crying, you don't have to go and hug them or pat them on the shoulder or ask them if they're okay, because they could be crying out of a catharsis. You've let them know that if they want to talk to you, they can speak up, but don't go and interrupting their moment. Tears can actually be some of the most beautiful things that flow out of a human being, especially on a psychedelic, and it doesn't mean we have to go talk to them if something is happening, and we don't need to go asking them all kinds of questions. However, let's say someone is having a moment or a challenging experience and they talk to you. They say, hey man, hello Mr. Trip Sitter or Mrs. Trip Sitter, I'm having a tough time. They just tell you something like that. They're not going so well and they want you to fix things, or they just want to talk to you. What do you say in that moment? The first thing I recommend is trust your wisdom. You can even pray to God if you like to give you the right words. Let God flow through you. Be an angel if you like, and say something divine and beautiful to bless them if they're going through a tough trip. But in general, because you have been a great trip sitter so far, you have already affirmed with them what is their intention, and you've confirmed in your own heart that their intention is a good one. So if they're having a tough experience, you can reassure them to simply trust in God, trust in love, trust in faith, trust in the Holy Spirit, and remind them of their intention. What was their intention? And remind them how beautiful and how noble their intention was. It's not guaranteed to work, but for me at least, and everyone I've seen, if someone has a pure intention and things get a bit messy, if you can just have faith in the genuineness of your intention that you had, things get back on track. We don't want to focus on the negativity too much. So if they start to have, let's say, a spinning pattern of thoughts about how useless they are, I'm just coming up with a random example. Maybe this person is having an experience that, oh, I'm such a loser and my life is going nowhere, I don't want to live anymore, something like that. Then you, as the trip sitter, remind them of their initial intention, remind them of that, and be kind. Let them know as well, if they are going through something really negative, that this is karma that was stored within them, and this psychedelic is boiling it up. This karma is coming up, but it's not true, it's an illusion. And this psychedelic experience is a chance to let go of that by trusting in the love of God and trusting that God can heal us. Whatever negativity they are feeling, tell them that God can heal all of that. The Holy Spirit can wash them clean. It can do it. So letting them know that can be really powerful and useful. Now, what else do I have on my list? We've covered catharsis, breaking silence, reassurance. So all of what I'm saying is a general recommendation. That's important to say. Let's say you are trip sitting for your partner. You know your partner very, very, very well. So let's say they are crying in a way that you know is not normal and they are really not in a good place, then you can disobey my general recommendations that I just suggested to you and go and hug them. You can hug your partner if you feel like it's the right time. Use your own internal wisdom. Everything I'm saying before is, general recommendations, but you obviously have to use your own spiritual insight to know exactly what to do in the moment. This is a very beautiful cushion, but I shall not sit on it. Instead, we're going to look at the flowers, which is an aspect of nature. Now I'm going to talk about if your friend has decided they want to walk in nature instead of sitting down in a room and meditate, they want to walk through nature. So what do we do in that scenario as they are having their psychedelic experience? This can be really, really good because nature can heal us. Simply hearing the birds, seeing the trees sway in the wind. On a spiritual level, this can really connect us to nature. So it is good to go walking through nature. I would suggest, again, that we don't talk too much. Talk to the level that their spirit is called to. But if they want to walk through nature silently, I don't think we need to go starting conversations. However, if they start conversations that are spiritually introspective, then we can of course engage with them and speak in a really beautiful, heart-centered way. If they start to get distracted about really random stuff that's not connected to nature or their heart, then we could perhaps just remind them of their intention and that we are doing the psychedelic for, responsible healing purposes. Remind them of their intention. If something happens that is unexpected, like a random dog approaches you or a random person wants to speak to you, you as the sober one, of course, take charge and handle the situation. As I've mentioned before, you shouldn't be anywhere dangerous. Don't go rock climbing or just walking somewhere where there's a risk of drowning over water next to a river. I assume you're being very safe and responsible as a great trip sitter and you're walking somewhere safe. So in this scenario, walk through nature and be a part of nature. Let their soul talk as much as it feels needed to, and listen to them deeply. That's what you can focus on. Listening from the heart in a deep, authentic way, instead of sharing so much. It really is beautiful to walk in nature, and you can let the experience lead itself. Oh, and also, don't go chasing any dragons or chasing any butterflies. What I mean by that is stay on the path that you're walking. Don't go running through the bush. It's quite easy to sprain one's ankle. A snake could bite someone if you're not being careful. And we just want to avoid anything like that happening. Hello. Yes, I would like to reserve a table for tonight. The very best seat that you have. 7 p.m. works perfectly, actually. Thank you very much. We'll see you later. So, now that your friend has completely finished their psychedelic experience, what is the final step? Of course, you could just go home when their experience is done, but since we are trying to be a really good trip sitter, we could even spend a little bit more time with them and help them integrate their experience a little bit. So perhaps they had a fantastic, magical, enlightening experience, or maybe it was a little bit tough for them, a challenging trip. But either way, there's a few things I can recommend that you do right after the experience. So they may want to take a little nap, and that can be good for the brain to just rest a little bit. There's one thing I would recommend for you to steer clear of, and that is it's not the best if they go on their phone afterwards. Try and avoid that. There's nothing wrong with phones, they're extremely useful, but we are so attached to them these days that after a psychedelic experience, it's very normal for people to go surfing the matrix of social media, that mindless matrix, which is not so liberating. So after a really interesting, heart-centered psychedelic experience, it's not best to get sucked into our phones straight away. So, you can encourage them to not go on their phone. Texting someone afterwards is fine, but not to doom scroll on social media straight away would be a good thing. So instead, I recommend two main things you can do afterwards, both of which involves having an open discussion with them. So they've broken the silence and now they are probably going to be ready for you to gently start talking to them, and they will almost certainly like it if you show some curiosity about what they experienced at this point. So two good places you can take them is, number one, for a walk through nature, maybe just a walk around your neighborhood, or you could even be really fancy and take them somewhere like the beach. The beach is so healing and therapeutic. Now I've forgotten that word. Therapeutic. And it is very grounding, nurturing, all the good words you can think of. That's what the beach does for me. Swimming can also be extremely refreshing, but keep in mind, swimming is actually much more dangerous than it seems, especially at the beach, and especially if the psychedelic is still tapering off. So I don't really want to recommend going swimming at the ocean, but if it's a really safe environment, like there's lifeguards, there's no rip currents, then it can be nice to go for a little swim after the chemical has worn off completely. And both of you are sober, a swim in the ocean can be so refreshing. If you don't want to swim, just a walk along the beach can be great. Or maybe a walk along the river, just being in nature and having a heart-to-heart, open conversation that is really integrative to the other person. Another option, which I just did a little skit with earlier, is to take them to a nice restaurant. Me, at least, a good way to ground my experience after a psychedelic is to eat something. It helps me settle down and relax. So going to a restaurant can be a good idea. You just did your friend a big favor, so you can drive them there, but maybe they could buy you a nice dinner. That would be a nice reciprocal gesture that they can give you. And I recommend going somewhere healthy. Try to eat vegan or at least vegetarian after this very interesting experience. Eat something light but tasty. I personally love Thai food, maybe green curry or some coconut rice, something that's filling but reasonably healthy, and then just enjoy each other's company. And that's it. That's everything I have to offer you today. If you have any little tips or big tips about how to be a great trip sitter, I would welcome you to tell that to me and everyone in the comments. Share your thoughts. But I would like to finish the video by saying thank you. I want to say thank you to you for helping spread Nirvana one heart at a time. It's a really noble thing to do. It's an act of giving, and if you do something like that, wow, I have nothing but admiration and respect for you.